The flickering warmth of a home video illuminates the living room, casting dancing shadows on Sarah Reed's face as she watches. On screen, a younger, vibrant Alex, 34, effortlessly navigates a treacherous single-track trail, his laughter echoing against the red rock canyons of Sedona. He was the embodiment of controlled adrenaline, a master of his custom-built mountain bike, yet the footage always cut back to quieter moments. Alex teaching their daughter, Lily, to ride her first tricycle, his strong hand steadying her, or a stolen kiss with Sarah on their porch, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. He was their anchor, a man whose love for adventure was surpassed only by his devotion to his family, a duality that defined their world and filled their small home with a sense of boundless, secure happiness. Their house, nestled at the edge of town, was a testament to that life. The air inside always carried a faint scent of Sarah's baking and the chain lube from Alex's workshop in the garage. Morning light would stream through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing over the wooden table where Lily's crayon drawings were proudly displayed. Alex's routine was a familiar rhythm, an early rise, the quiet hum of the espresso machine, a final check of his bike's tire pressure, and a meticulous gear layout on the garage floor. This space was his sanctuary, where maps of Sedona's labyrinthine trails were pinned to the walls like sacred texts, each line a promise of a future adventure he planned to conquer and return from, as he always did. On that particular morning, the normality was almost palpable, thick and comforting like the Arizona air before a summer monsoon. Alex, clad in his riding gear, knelt to tie Lily's shoe, promising her a piggyback ride the moment he got home. He kissed Sarah deeply, a familiar gesture that held no premonition, no hint of a final farewell. Back by sunset, he promised, his voice confident and clear. Sarah watched from the doorway as he clipped into his pedals, the familiar click echoing in the quiet street. He gave one last wave, a bright smile on his face, before disappearing down the road, a lone figure pedaling toward the immense, silent monoliths of rock that waited, indifferent and ancient, on the horizon. The first sign of unease was the light. As the sun began its descent, it bled across the Sedona sky, painting the undersides of the clouds in fiery oranges and deep purples, the exact colors Alex loved. In the kitchen, the scent of roasting chicken filled the warm air, a familiar comfort that was slowly beginning to feel like a lie. Sarah moved with a practiced rhythm, setting the table for 3, but her eyes kept straying to the clock on the wall, its ticking, a slow, merciless metronome, marking the minutes past Alex's promised return. Lily, playing with wooden blocks on the living room floor, was oblivious, her happy chatter a stark contrast to the knot of anxiety tightening in Sarah's stomach. The promise, back by sunset, echoed in her mind, no longer a simple statement but a fragile tether to a day that was rapidly unraveling. Darkness fell not gently but like a heavy blanket, smothering the last vestiges of color from the sky. The house grew quiet, the sounds from outside muted and distant. The dinner sat on the counter, cooling. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home for our piggyback ride?" Lily's small voice cut through the oppressive silence, each word a tiny, innocent blade twisting in Sarah's heart. She forced a smile that felt brittle, a mask of reassurance she couldn't feel. "Soon, sweetie? He's probably just chasing one last bit of sunlight." Pulling out her phone, her thumb hovered over his contact photo. That familiar, confident smile. The call connected, but after a single ring, it was replaced by the cold, impersonal greeting of his voicemail, a digital tombstone where his voice should have been. An hour bled into 2. Sarah's forced calm fractured, replaced by a frantic energy that propelled her from window to window, peering into the impenetrable blackness, as if she could will his silhouette to appear on the road. Her mind became a battleground, with rational explanations warring against a rising tide of primal fear. A flat tire, a broken chain. He was resourceful. He would walk it out. He was an expert. He knew these trails like the back of his hand. But the wilderness didn't care about expertise. It was vast, ancient, and indifferent. The image of him alone out there, the profound silence of the canyons pressing in, the pinprick stars offering no warmth, sent a tremor of pure dread through her body. With a shaking hand, she finally dialed 911. The simple act felt like a betrayal, an admission that the hope she had clung to so desperately was gone. Her voice was a reedy, unfamiliar thing as she explained the situation to the calm, detached dispatcher on the other end. "My husband, Alex Reed. He went mountain biking on the Hangover Trail. He was supposed to be back by sunset." Each word felt heavy, a piece of her carefully constructed world crumbling into dust. The operator's procedural questions, what was he wearing, what kind of bike, did he have a GPS tracker, were a surreal anchor to a reality she didn't want to accept. The call ended, and the silence that rushed back in was heavier, more final than before. The official response was swift and immense, a stark juxtaposition to the intimate, personal terror unfolding within the walls of her home. Far out in the desert, the night was torn apart by the piercing beams of searchlights and the rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades echoing off the canyon walls. At the trailhead, a small city of emergency vehicles materialized, casting a harsh, sterile glow on the grim-faced search and rescue volunteers. It didn't take them long to find his truck, parked neatly in its spot, its metallic shell cool and indifferent under the moon. It was a chilling, silent testament, confirming he had arrived full of life and anticipation, but had been swallowed whole by the wilderness he so loved, leaving nothing behind but a locked door and an empty parking space. Back in the house, Detective Miller arrived, his presence solidifying the nightmare into an official investigation. He was a kind man, his eyes holding a weary empathy that spoke of too many nights spent in homes just like hers, but his questions were relentless probes into the raw wound of her fear. She sat on the sofa clutching a framed photo of Alex on their wedding day, the glass cold against her trembling fingers. The search was a distant, abstract noise now, a faint whir of blades, a crackle over a radio. Her world had shrunk to this room, to the detective's quiet voice and the suffocating weight of a single, all-consuming question that hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Where was he? 5 years is an eternity carved out by silence. The house no longer smells of chain lube. That scent, once so intrinsically linked to Alex's presence, has been scrubbed away by time and Sarah's relentless cleaning. Now it holds the sterile aroma of lemon polish and the faint sweet perfume of the wilting flowers Lily brings home from school. Sarah moves through the rooms with a quiet efficiency that borders on brittleness. Her laughter is softer. Her smiles don't quite reach her eyes, which now hold the permanent, weary look of a sentinel on a watch that never ends. The vibrant colors of their shared life have desaturated, leaving behind a muted palette of survival, a life lived in the long, cold shadow of a question mark. Lily, now 9, knows her father mostly as a collection of digital ghosts and carefully curated stories. She traces his face on the screen of the old camcorder, her small finger outlining the smile of a man she barely remembers in flesh and blood. "Was he really that fast, Mom?" she asks, her voice filled with a child's pure admiration. Sarah nods, forcing warmth into her voice. The fastest. But the questions are getting harder. They are no longer about his favorite color, but about the wilderness itself. "Why didn't the rocks tell anyone where he went?" she once asked, a query so innocent and profound it shattered Sarah's fragile composure for an entire afternoon, leaving her to weep in the sanctuary of the garage where his map still hung, faded and curling at the edges. Some nights, Sarah still finds herself standing at the kitchen sink, staring out at the impenetrable darkness where the canyons lie, and she speaks to him. The conversations are a tangled mess of anger, and longing. "Why did you have to go alone, Alex? Why did you leave us with this—" "Nothing," she whispers into the glass. The anger is a shield against the deeper, more terrifying feeling, the cold certainty that he wouldn't have just gotten lost. He was too skilled, too meticulous. This belief fuels a different kind of pain, a constant, low-grade hum of dread that imagines scenarios far worse than a simple fall, keeping her tethered to a hope that feels more like a curse, a refusal to let the silence be the final answer. The first anniversary had been the worst. Driven by a grief so raw it felt like a physical tearing, she had defied the advice of friends and the patient warnings of Detective Miller. She'd hiked the hangover trail herself, her boots slipping on the same red dust Alex had last touched. Every glint of metal, every piece of discarded trash, sent a jolt of sickening hope through her veins. She called his name until her throat was raw, the sound swallowed by the vast, indifferent stone. The emptiness that answered her was more profound than any sound, a definitive statement from the wilderness that it kept its secrets well. She had returned home that day covered in dust, hollowed out, realizing the search was not a physical one she could ever win. Detective Miller, now gray-haired and just months from retirement, keeps the Alex Reed file in the bottom drawer of his desk, not in the cold case archives. It has become a personal ghost, a testament to his own limitations in the face of an unforgiving landscape. He sometimes pulls out the file on quiet afternoons, staring at Alex's smiling driver's license photo. He remembers the raw, animalistic grief in Sarah Reed's eyes during those first few days, a look he's never quite forgotten. He'd promised her they would find answers, a promise that now feels like a professional and personal failure. The case is a weight, a loose thread in the tapestry of his long career that he fears he'll never be able to tie off. In the local mountain biking community, Alex's story has morphed into a somber legend, a cautionary tale whispered at trailheads before a difficult ride. "Remember Alex Reed," a seasoned rider might say to a newcomer. "This place doesn't forgive mistakes." His disappearance serves as a stark reminder of the razor-thin line between adventure and tragedy, his name now synonymous with the inherent dangers of the beautiful, brutal landscape. For them, he is a ghost who haunts the single-track trails, a symbol of the ultimate price for a moment of bad luck or a single miscalculation. His personal story has been absorbed into the mythology of the Red Rocks, his profound and specific loss becoming an abstract warning for strangers. There are still moments that ambush Sarah, catching her completely off guard. A man with Alex's broad shoulders seen from behind in the grocery store, a flash of a bright blue riding jersey in a passing car, the specific way the late afternoon sun hits the canyon rim. For a single breathtaking second, the 5 years collapse into nothing, and the hope she keeps buried under layers of scar tissue erupts, fierce and wild. Her heart hammers against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, before reality crashes back in with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless and shaking. It's in these moments she understands that her grief is not a linear path, but a circle she is destined to walk forever. As another day ends, Sarah stands with Lily on their porch, watching the sun bleed its fiery colors across the sky, the same spectacle of beauty that had once marked the beginning of her nightmare. The monoliths in the distance are dark silhouettes, ancient and secretive. Lily leans against her, her small hand finding Sarah's. "He's still out there watching the sunset with us, isn't he?" the girl asks softly. Sarah pulls her daughter closer, the warmth of her small body a fragile anchor in a sea of uncertainty. "Always," she replies, her voice a steady vow made to the silent watching stones. The hope is no longer frantic, but a quiet, stubborn ember that 5 years of darkness has failed to extinguish completely. It began with a glint of light where no light should be. 2 young hikers, barely out of their teens and driven by a desire to find a piece of Sedona untouched by tourist footprints, had pushed deep into a narrow, unnamed canyon. The air was still and hot, the silence broken only by the crunch of their boots on loose scree and the buzz of a lone cicada. They were searching for solitude, not secrets. But as the midday sun crested the canyon wall, a single sharp reflection shot out from a recent rock slide, a small, unnatural star against the dull red earth. It was out of place, a metallic discord in nature's silent symphony, compelling enough to make them pause and alter their course. Their initial curiosity was tinged with caution as they scrambled over the jumble of fallen boulders. The object was more than just a glint, it was the curve of a handlebar, jutting from the earth like a skeletal hand. Working together, they clawed away rocks and sun-baked dirt, slowly unearthing the mangled frame of a mountain bike. It was a ruin, its frame twisted into an agonizing shape, the components bleached and corroded by 5 years of brutal sun and flash floods. They recognized the high-end suspension and the remnants of a custom paint job, realizing this wasn't discarded trash. This was the ghost of a serious rider, a silent, violent testament to a final, tragic journey that had ended right here, buried and forgotten. The call reached Detective Miller's desk an hour later, cutting through the quiet hum of his last few months on the force. The words, mountain bike, rock slide, remote canyon, were a jolt of electricity, instantly resurrecting the one case that had burrowed under his skin, the Alex Reed file. He felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with a profound sense of dread, the weight of that 5-year-old promise to Sarah settling on his shoulders once more. Driving toward the trailhead, the familiar crimson monoliths seemed to watch him with an ancient indifference. This time, however, he felt a grim certainty that the landscape was finally ready to give up one of its secrets, for better or for worse. For Sarah, the world stopped when the phone rang. She was in the kitchen, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the floor, the smell of dinner just beginning to fill the air. It was a scene of domestic peace, fragile and hard-won. Detective Miller's voice on the other end was gentle, cautious, but the words, "Sarah, we have a development," shattered the calm instantly. "We found a bike. We believe it's Alex's." Hope, a feeling she had learned to treat as a poison, flooded her system with the force of a tidal wave, violent and terrifying. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob as her knees buckled, the carefully constructed dam she'd built around her heart cracking under the sudden, immense pressure of a 5-year-old question. At the recovery site, the atmosphere was thick, with a tense, almost reverent silence. Miller stood back, watching the forensic team work with the slow, deliberate precision of archaeologists unearthing a sacred relic. The bike was lifted from its earthen grave, every piece catalogued and photographed. It was as they were examining the heavily damaged rear wheel that a young technician paused, frowning. He ran a gloved finger along the inner channel of the rim, where the tire had been torn away. Tucked deep inside the structure, wedged between 2 spokes and covered in hardened mud, was a small, dark square. It wasn't debris from the crash. It was too uniform, too intentionally placed, as if someone had jammed it there for safekeeping. With a pair of delicate tweezers, the technician carefully worked the object free. He placed it in Miller's outstretched palm. It was a micro SD card, its plastic casing scratched and worn but otherwise intact, miraculously shielded from the elements for half a decade within its metallic cocoon. A collective breath was held. This single, tiny piece of plastic changed everything. It transformed the scene from a tragic accident into something else entirely. This wasn't just a crash site. It was a message in a bottle. Alex, in his final, desperate moments, hadn't just been fighting for his life. He had been fighting to preserve a truth, a final echo from the silent canyons. The journey from the sun-scorched canyon back to the sterile environment of the police department's forensic lab was a silent, tense affair. Detective Miller cradled the evidence bag containing the micro SD card as if it were a live, fragile thing. 5 years of silence, of cold trails and unanswered questions were now condensed into this tiny square of plastic and silicon. His professionalism warred with a deeply personal sense of urgency. Procedure demanded a slow, methodical approach, but every fiber of his being screamed to unlock its secrets for Sarah. The weight of his 5-year-old promise, a promise he thought he would carry into retirement as a failure, now felt heavier than ever, transformed from a burden of grief into one of immense, terrifying possibility. Miller knew the call to Sarah would be one of the most difficult of his career. He waited until he was back in the quiet of his office, the file for Alex Reed open on his desk, its faded photograph a silent witness. He chose his words with surgical precision, attempting to build a shield of caution around the explosive core of hope. "Sarah, we are analyzing something we found with the bike. It might not be anything, but we have to be thorough." He could hear her sharp intake of breath, a sound that conveyed a universe of pain and desperate yearning. She was silent for a long moment, and he pictured her in that house, a place frozen in time, the fragile piece of her life about to be shattered by this ghost from the past. The forensic lab became the new epicenter of the investigation, a high-tech seance attempting to coax a story from a dead object. The SD card, though remarkably preserved, had suffered microscopic damage from years of temperature fluctuations and the violent impact of the rock slide. The lead technician, a young woman with unnervingly steady hands, explained the challenge in stark terms. "The data is fragmented, the directory structure is gone, we're not just recovering files, we're piecing together digital ghosts, byte by byte." The process was agonizingly slow. Hours bled into a full day as they ran complex recovery algorithms, the progress bar on the monitor inching forward with infuriating slowness, each percentage point a small victory in the war against time and decay. The first images flickered to life on the screen late the next afternoon. They were mundane, yet profoundly haunting. The clips showed the world from Alex's perspective, the blur of red dirt on the single-track trail, the handlebars of his bike, bobbing in the frame, the rhythmic sound of his own steady breathing against the crunch of tires on gravel. Miller watched, mesmerized and deeply unsettled, as this man he'd only known as a victim came alive. He saw Alex navigate a treacherous switchback with expert grace, a brief whoop of exhilaration echoing from the past. It was a cruel reminder of the vibrant life that had been extinguished, making the silence that followed all the more deafening and ominous. While the lab worked, Sarah existed in a state of suspended animation. Sleep was impossible. Food tasted like ash. Every ring of the phone sent a jolt of electricity through her system. She found herself wandering into the garage, Alex's sanctuary, running her hand over the dusty workbench and staring at the intricate web of trails on his wall maps. Her mind raced, creating 1,000 different scenarios, each one more painful than the last. Was it a fall? An animal? Did he suffer? Lily, with a child's unerring intuition, sensed the shift. "Are they going to find Daddy's bike, Mom?" she asked, her simple question cutting through Sarah's turmoil and grounding her in the terrifying reality that any answer would irrevocably change their lives forever. A breakthrough came on the third day. A longer, more coherent fragment was salvaged, and its contents sent a chill through the entire lab. The tone was completely different. The rhythmic breathing was gone, replaced by ragged, panicked gasps. Alex was off his bike, the camera low to the ground, capturing the rough texture of a rock face. The audio was filled with the sound of scraping, of his body pressing into a narrow crevice. He was moving with a stealthy desperation, not like an injured man seeking shelter, but like prey trying to evade a predator. Miller's blood ran cold. The official narrative, the comforting but tragic story of a skilled rider who had a fatal accident, was dissolving before his very eyes. The revelation forced Miller to re-examine every aspect of the original thin case file. He felt the immense obstacle of time itself working against him. 5 years had passed. Potential witnesses had moved away, their memories faded. He spent a frustrating day trying to track down a couple who had been hiking near the Hangover Trail that same afternoon, their original statement providing little value. He felt like he was fighting a ghost with one hand tied behind his back. The wilderness had kept its secret, and now time was guarding it just as fiercely, obscuring details and burying the truth under another 5 years of accumulated silence, making every small step forward feel like a monumental struggle. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place just before dawn. The technician, exhausted but triumphant, called Miller back into the lab. "This is it, the last recoverable segment." On the monitor, the world lurched into view from Alex's hiding place. He was peering over a ledge of red rock. The footage was shaky, distorted by damage to the lens, but for 2 heart-stopping seconds, it captured a figure standing on a distant ridge. The image was too blurry to make out a face, but it was undeniably a person. Then the camera whipped to the side, a sickening crunch of impact resonated, and the screen dissolved into a blizzard of digital static. Silence. Miller stared at the dead screen, the truth landing with the force of a physical blow. This was never an accident. It was a murder. Detective Miller didn't ask her to come to the station over the phone. He came to her door himself, a courtesy that felt more like a harbinger of doom. The viewing room was a small, windowless space, painted a sterile beige that seemed to absorb all sound and warmth. Sarah sat opposite Miller at a simple table, a large monitor dark and silent between them. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, a fragile dam against a flood of emotions. Miller's voice was low, devoid of any procedural coldness, replaced by a deep human gravity. "Sarah," he began, his eyes meeting hers, "what you are about to see is the last recoverable file. It's difficult, but you deserve to see it." The quiet hum of the computer's fan was the only sound as he clicked the mouse, and 5 years of silence prepared to finally speak. The screen flickered to life, and for a heart-stopping moment it was him. It was Alex's world, the familiar bob and weave of the handlebars, the red earth blurring past, the sound of his steady, powerful breathing. Sarah felt a sob catch in her throat, a painful mix of love and loss. But then the image jolted violently. The rhythmic breathing was gone, replaced by ragged, panicked gasps. The camera was low, scraping against rock, the audio filled with the frantic sound of someone hiding. Sarah leaned forward, her breath held captive in her chest, as Alex's hand came into view, steadying the camera as he peered over a ledge. For 2 seconds that stretched into an eternity. A blurry figure stood on a distant ridge. Then, a sickeningly sharp crunch, the world spun into a chaotic blur, and the screen dissolved into a blizzard of digital snow. The static hissed into the profound silence of the room. The monitor's dead gray light reflected in Sarah's wide, unblinking eyes. The question that had haunted her for 5 years, the ambiguous void of the wilderness, the possibility of a fall, an animal, a simple, tragic mistake, was gone. In its place was a new reality, a truth so violent and absolute it stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't the canyons that had taken him. It was a person. The grief that erupted within her was not the dull ache of loss she had grown accustomed to. It was a fresh, sharp, and feral thing, a grief for a man who hadn't just died, but had been hunted. Her hands finally unclasped, falling limp at her sides as a single, quiet sob escaped her lips, a sound not of sorrow, but of a terrible, final, and horrifying clarity. The investigation was no longer cold. It was a roaring fire. Detective Miller, postponing his retirement indefinitely, channeled 5 years of quiet frustration into a focused, relentless hunt. The blurry figure from the footage became his singular obsession, a ghost he pursued through old hiking logs, vehicle registrations, and faded memories of other visitors to the park that day. For Sarah, the shift was seismic. The ambiguous grief she had carried like a shroud was replaced by something harder, sharper, rage. The canyons were no longer a vast, indifferent tomb, but a crime scene. Her sorrow was now alloyed with a fierce, burning need for justice. The question was no longer, "Where are you?" but a venomous, whispered, "Who are you?" directed at the faceless shadow who had hunted her husband. Returning home that night, Sarah saw her house not as a sanctuary of memories, but as the epicenter of a violent act. Every photograph of Alex's smiling face was now a silent accusation. The most difficult task was facing Lily, whose innocent world was about to be fractured. She knelt before her daughter, the carefully constructed story of a tragic accident crumbling to dust. "Mommy?" Lily asked, sensing the shift. "Did they find out what happened to Daddy's bike?" Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words with the care of someone disarming a bomb. "They did, sweetie," she began, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her soul. "Daddy was so brave. He was stronger than the mountains, but a bad person hurt him." The comforting myth was gone, replaced by a monstrous truth. Months later, the case remained open, a single blurry photograph pinned to a board in Miller's office. The ghost on the ridge remained a ghost. But the silence that had defined their lives for 5 years was gone, replaced by the hum of an active investigation, of a truth, however terrible, being pursued. One evening, Sarah and Lily stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the same fiery colors across the sky. The monoliths were no longer just secretive, they were witnesses. Lily, now older in her understanding, leaned against her mother. "Are they still looking for the person who hurt Daddy?" she asked quietly. Sarah pulled her close, her gaze fixed on the distant red rocks. "Every single day," she vowed, "and will never stop." The hope was different now, not for a return, but for a reckoning.